Spencer's cologne hit you before he did. Expensive, aggressive, and about as subtle as a fire alarm in a library. He strutted into the conference room like he owned the building, which technically his daddy did, being on the board and all. Behind him sat a stack of manila folders, each one somebody's career in 12-point Arial. Mine was right on top. I'm Preston Donovan, 49 years old, and I've been keeping Summit Financial Solutions legally bulletproof for the last 13 years. Before that, I did logistics for the Air Force, which taught me two things. Attention to detail saves lives, and idiots with authority are the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal. Thanks for coming in, Preston, Spencer said, flashing that MBA smile that never reaches the eyes. This should only take a few minutes. The door clicked shut behind me. No witnesses, no union rep, just me, Spencer, and a motivational poster of a mountain that read, "Innovation through Disruption. Real original." Spencer launched into his prepared speech, polished like his daddy's money could buy. Words like streamlining, organizational synergy, and redundant functionality rolled off his tongue like he'd practiced in the mirror. I didn't even blink. In 13 years here, I'd seen 4 CEOs, a data breach that made national news, 3 acquisitions, and a global pandemic. I'd held this department together with federal regulations, compliance audits, and more 3 a.m. emergency filings than I cared to count. But apparently Spencer's 2 years at the company and an MBA from Wharton gave him the right to swing the axe. "We'll be removing your credentials from the registry today," he said, sliding a stapled packet across the table like it was a restaurant check. "Per the separation agreement, your professional liability designation will be terminated immediately. Shouldn't be a problem. Legal already reviewed everything." A small red flag went up in the back of my mind, but I kept it there. I didn't argue, didn't correct him, didn't mention that my designation was the only reason half our federal contracts were still insured, or that the policy itself had a clause written back in 2011 that made me irreplaceable under current federal guidelines. That would have spoiled the show. Instead, I signed 4 pages, initialed the bottom like I was signing for a pizza delivery. I even thanked him for the opportunity with the kind of dead-eyed smile that MBAs usually mistake for professional courtesy. Spencer's final move was sliding across a small blue envelope containing a company-branded stress ball and a QR code for life after layoffs, a mindfulness journey, as if a lavender-scented podcast could clean up the crater they were about to walk into. "Do you have any questions?" he asked, already turning toward his monitor like I'd evaporated. "Just one," I said, standing up. "Where should I leave my badge?" His eyes flicked up, caught something in my voice, then flicked away. "Front desk is fine. By the time I walked back to my office, my former office, word had already spread like burnt coffee in the break room. A few people poked their heads out of cubicles. Vincent from finance gave me a confused thumbs up. Bennett from legal just mouthed, "What the hell?" I gave him a little shrug. Inside, the air still smelled like the peppermint from my desk diffuser. I took a moment, let the silence settle, then opened the bottom drawer. Past the coffee-stained HR memos and compliance updates, I pulled out a small black binder, leather, worn, and absolutely priceless. Inside were photocopies of every underwriting memo, credential approval, and legal note from the year we landed the R-17 federal compliance account. The one that kept us solvent. The one that required a very specific combination of licenses and certifications. Mine. Not transferable. Not replicable. Most importantly, not optional under current federal guidelines. I'd earned these certifications the hard way. 6 months of federal training in D.C., 400 hours of continuing education, and passing 3 separate board examinations that had a 23% pass rate. The grandfathered status meant I was one of only 2 people in the country who could legally sign off on certain federal risk assessments without additional oversight. The other guy, Murphy, had retired to Florida 8 months ago to fish and complain about taxes. Spencer, in all his MBA wisdom, had just fired the last man standing. I tucked the binder into my briefcase, took one last look around the office, and turned off the light. They thought they'd saved money on my salary. What they'd actually done was start the insurance clock ticking, and it had about 12 hours before the whole policy imploded. By lunchtime, my old chair was already occupied by Penelope Cross, fresh from Spencer's personal shortlist of agile team players. She was 26, loud, and had been with the company for 6 weeks. Her last job was coordinating social media for a juice startup that went bankrupt selling kale smoothies to millennials. Now she was in charge of high-risk liability oversight for $73 million in federal contracts. The fact that she was CEO Cross's niece probably didn't hurt her chances. You could practically hear the regulations weeping. Word spread fast through the office. People came by pretending to grab supplies just to peek through my open door. Some lingered in the hallway with coffee mugs they didn't need refilled. Nobody said anything at first, but I could feel the questions eating at their professionalism. Bennett from legal was the first to crack. "You're really leaving? Why? Who's going to sign off on the CX compliance filings? You're the only one certified for—" "I'm sure Penelope will figure it out," I said, gently tucking my calculator into a box like I wasn't mentally picturing the entire federal audit process combusting in her hands. "But your license is already removed," he said, voice tight with concern. I smiled. A calm, peaceful smile that probably gave him nightmares later. The irony was beautiful. They'd spent 13 years paying me to be their safety net, never bothering to understand what that actually meant. Now they were about to find out the difference between having insurance and being insurable. Spencer popped his head in mid-afternoon like a cruise director checking if the passengers had finished packing. "Hey, just a heads up, we'll be deactivating your system access at 5 p.m. Need a cart for your stuff?" "I've got it," I replied. He lingered a second too long. Legal had some questions about transition paperwork, but I told them we're covered. Penelope's onboarding includes risk compliance. I said nothing, because the urge to laugh might have cost me my last thread of dignity. Penelope's training was probably a 2-hour PowerPoint and a laminated cheat sheet. Meanwhile, the binder in my bag contained the holy grail of underwriter agreements. The original approval, stamped with my name back when I was one of only 6 certified risk authorities grandfathered under pre-2010 federal rules. That number had since dropped to 2, and now it was about to become 1. But sure, let's throw the CEO's niece at federal compliance. Around 3:45, Vincent from finance appeared in my doorway looking like someone had just told him his retirement portfolio was actually Monopoly money. "Spencer said you're leaving." "That's right," I said, taping up my second box. "Preston, you've got oversight on the Whitmore project and all the federal filings. What about the quarterly risk reports? The SOX audits? I'm sure someone else will pick up the slack," I echoed Spencer's earlier words. His eyes narrowed like he wanted to argue, but didn't know how, because technically, they'd signed the paperwork. They'd approved removing my license from the firm's professional liability registry. Vincent, for all his spreadsheet wizardry, had never bothered to read the part of the policy that hinged on that specific license still being active. By 4 p.m., the office was back to pretending nothing had happened. My name was already off the door. My email was redirected to Penelope. I left my keycard on the front desk, gave the receptionist a genuine smile, and walked to the elevator like I hadn't just unplugged their entire insurance foundation. No one chased after me. No alarms sounded. Just the soft ding of the elevator doors and the weight of that binder in my briefcase, quiet and humming like a live wire. The only sound in my apartment that night was my German Shepherd Kaiser padding across the hardwood floors and the occasional creak of settling timber. I'd poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, neat, not celebratory, just quiet, the kind of drink you have after 13 years of keeping a company safe from its own stupidity. My laptop screen lit the room in that familiar blue glow. Not corporate dashboards this time. This was personal. I logged into the National Risk Registry, a government website with all the charm of a DMV form attached to a blinking cursor. My credentials were still active, still verified, still tied to every policy my name had ever underwritten across 5 clients, 3 business verticals, and 1 firm that now believed Penelope from the smoothie world could handle federal compliance. The cursor blinked next to request to surrender credentials. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a checkbox confirming I understood the implications. I checked yes. Then a drop-down menu for reason for surrender. I selected no longer affiliated with sponsoring organization. The irony almost made me laugh. They'd pushed me out and handed me this choice, like giving a demolitions expert the detonator on their way out the door. I glanced at the clock. 11:57 p.m. Clicked submit. The system churned for a moment. The kind of slow, government-mandated processing that makes you wonder if anything's actually happening behind the digital curtain. Then, 11:58 p.m., credential surrender confirmed. Notice sent to associated insurers. Active coverage may be affected. That last line was the one that mattered. May be affected was compliance speak for y'all are officially screwed and don't know it yet. I minimized the window, opened a new tab, and logged into my personal risk monitoring system, something I'd set up years ago when I realized nobody at the company actually knew how to read underwriter feedback unless it came with bullet points and pictures. The alert hadn't triggered yet. These things take time to propagate through the federal databases, like dominoes falling in slow motion across a continent of bureaucracy. I sat back, let the silence settle. Kaiser jumped up on the couch next to me, a 90-pound furry anchor of calm. He'd been with me for 8 years, since he washed out of K-9 training for being too friendly. Apparently, police dogs aren't supposed to want belly rubs from suspects. At 12:03 a.m., my phone buzzed once, single vibration. I didn't even need to look. I knew what it was. Alert, risk compliance breach. Coverage flagged, level red. Somewhere in the insurer's back-end system, a little red warning box had just lit up with Summit Financial's name inside it. Not because someone filed a claim, not because of a lawsuit, but because the sole credential holding their entire $73 million risk umbrella had just vanished into thin air. Like pulling the one Jenga block that looks safe until the whole tower starts to groan. They wouldn't know right away. Not until a client ran their quarterly compliance check. Not until the automated audit cycle pinged the breach, or some auditor stumbled over the missing designation and realized, oh no, but it had started. The clock was ticking, and they had no idea. I closed the laptop, set it on the coffee table. Kaiser, sensing the shift in mood, put his massive head on my lap. I scratched behind his ears, took a long breath, and leaned back into the couch. Sleep came easy that night. No tossing, no replaying conversations, no mental checklists of worst-case scenarios. For the first time in months, I didn't carry their problems with me into the dark. The tether had snapped, and they didn't even know they were falling yet. Vincent always got to the office before sunrise, like he could outrun the financial disasters he swore lived just over the horizon. Creature of habit, black coffee, inbox, Bloomberg anxiety spiral, same tie rotation, same oversized desk, same framed MBA quote about managing risk, never eliminating it. So when he walked into his office at 6:30 a.m. and found a cream-colored envelope marked urgent, policy hold sitting dead center on his desk, it knocked his whole routine sideways. No return address, just a bold typed notice inside. Coverage voided pending clarification of risk authority, effective 12:03 a.m. His first thought, system glitch. Second thought, legal department typo. Third, some intern playing pranks with official letterhead. But the federal seal at the bottom looked real enough, and the reference numbers matched their policy documentation. He buzzed Bennett from legal. Bennett arrived with a tablet, half a bagel, and that look that said he'd already put out 5 fires before most people had their first coffee. "What's this about?" Vincent asked, sliding the notice across his desk. Bennett read it twice, then a third time. Could be an automated trigger. Sometimes these systems flag credential updates before they're fully processed. "We did have a credential change yesterday," Vincent said. "Preston's gone. Spencer signed off on the registry removal." Bennett blinked. "Wait, they already processed that? Who's listed as the new authority?" Vincent shrugged. "Spencer said Penelope's certified. The pause after her name was so long you could have driven a federal audit through it." Bennett pulled up the system, fingers dancing across his tablet like a surgeon hunting for a tumor. "There's no replacement credential logged. None. Just an open void where Preston's certification used to be." Vincent's mouth went dry. "So what does that mean exactly?" "It means," Bennett said slowly, "that as of right now we don't have an active credential backing our liability coverage. According to policy language, that voids it temporarily." He turned the screen toward Vincent. "Until a qualified, board-approved risk authority is designated." "Temporarily," Vincent repeated, like the word might change meaning if he said it enough times. "Yes, but look at this clause here. Section 9.1. Credential must be continuous, uninterrupted, and tied to original policyholder unless otherwise reviewed and reissued by Federal Oversight Committee. There's no review process logged. They didn't notify the underwriter. And since Preston's credential was grandfathered under pre-2010 rules." Vincent slumped back in his chair like gravity had doubled. The implications were starting to hit him like a slow-motion car crash. Every federal contract, every compliance certificate, every piece of paper that said Summit Financial Solutions was legally allowed to handle sensitive government work. All of it hung on credentials that no longer existed. Across the office floor, Spencer was already making his rounds, latte in hand, blissfully unaware that he'd kicked in the wrong door of the wrong building. When Bennett called him, he responded with his usual brand of dismissive confidence. "Just have him re-sign something," Spencer said over the phone, voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd never actually read a government contract. "He left on good terms, right? Tell him to authorize the transfer until Penelope gets certified." "He's not answering," Vincent said, his phone buzzing uselessly for the third time in 5 minutes. Spencer's voice went tight. "He's not being vindictive. Just explain the situation. We need a temporary sign-off." "He's not obligated," Bennett cut in. "No contract, no employment relationship, no legal requirement to respond." Spencer waved that off like it was a minor detail. "This will be resolved by end of day. You're all panicking over a technicality." Legal wasn't panicking yet, but something cold had crept into Bennett's voice. "This technicality affects every single contract with active risk clauses, including all federal work." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. At 10:47 a.m., the first call came in. It was Charles Morrison, Director of Compliance from Apex Dynamics, a $37 million client with a pathological distrust of anything that couldn't be notarized, laminated, and locked in a fireproof safe. Vincent took the call on speaker, half distracted by an email chain unraveling about Q3 projections. "Vincent," Charles said, "no greeting, no small talk. We ran your insurance credentials through our compliance system this morning as part of our milestone clearance process. It flagged a breach." Vincent froze. The email chain suddenly seemed very unimportant. "Your liability certificate shows coverage as void pending credential reassignment. We've paused all active milestones until we get updated proof of coverage. Our legal team is escalating this to our risk oversight committee." "That must be some kind of system lag," Vincent said, glancing at Bennett, who was already pulling up the Apex account folder. "We've got someone new stepping into the role." "I don't care who you plan to install," Charles snapped. "Your existing certificate is non-transferable. If you read the fine print, which I strongly suggest you do, you'll see the credential is tied to the policyholder, not the organization. It expires the moment the named authority is removed, which appears to have happened at 12:03 a.m. Vincent went pale. The exact timestamp meant their system had been monitoring in real time. This wasn't a delayed discovery. They'd known within minutes. "We'll need a new certificate issued and federally reviewed," Charles continued. "Until then, all progress payments and third-party integrations are on hold." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Bennett was already typing furiously. Apex wasn't the only one. Monitoring. If they caught it this fast, the automated compliance systems probably flagged it across the board. As if summoned by his words, Vincent's phone started ringing again, then Bennett's, then the main office line. By 11:15 a.m., they had 6 more calls. Pinnacle Solutions, Westbridge Industries. 2 smaller federal contractors whose names Vincent had to look up because he'd forgotten they even had active agreements. Each call followed the same script: automated compliance check, breach detected, work suspended pending resolution. At 11:20, 3 people in dark suits showed up in the lobby. Federal auditors, routine but unscheduled, they said. Bennett intercepted them, offering a conference room and coffee like this was just another harmless paperwork review. But 15 minutes into their examination, the lead auditor lifted her head and asked the question Vincent had been praying no one would ask. "Who is your current named certified risk authority?" Vincent cleared his throat. "Penelope Cross. She's been onboarded. Credential ID number?" Bennett typed, then frowned. "There isn't one assigned yet. It still shows Preston M. Donovan as the last verified authority. Status: surrendered." The auditor raised an eyebrow. "Then this policy is invalid as of the moment he stepped down." "We're handling the transition," Vincent said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's being processed." "It's not a process," the auditor said flatly. "It's binary. Credential present or not present. You're not compliant. That's a breach." She made a note in her tablet. "I suggest you alert your legal team immediately. Any work performed during this breach period could result in federal sanctions." The auditors left 20 minutes later, but the damage was done. Word spread through the office like smoke under a door. Preston wasn't just gone. He'd taken their entire legal foundation with him. By 1:15 p.m., Spencer was in full damage control mode, pacing the legal department in Italian leather shoes that clicked like a countdown timer. "We have to get Preston back on the phone," he said, chewing gum like it owed him money. "Offer him something. Anything. Say it was a miscommunication." Bennett, now buried under a mountain of policy documents, kept reading. Then he found it. "Here," he whispered. Everyone in the room stopped. Bennett read aloud. Clause 14.3 of the Underwriter Agreement. Coverage is contingent upon the continued certification of Preston M. Donovan as named Certified Risk Authority. Credential is grandfathered under pre-2010 federal guidelines and not transferable to new appointees without board-approved escalation and direct supervision from the original license holder. Silence. "Wait," Spencer said. "So we can't just replace him?" "Not unless we get him to supervise the replacement," Bennett said, "and even that requires board approval and federal review." Spencer's face went white. "That's insane." "It's federal law," Bennett said flatly. "We never owned the license. We employed the license holder." Outside the conference room, office life continued. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, someone microwaving fish in the break room like a war crime. But inside that room, the atmosphere was pure dread in tailored suits. Preston wasn't just gone. He'd taken their entire safety net with him. I let Spencer's call ring 4 times before picking up, just long enough to let him sweat. "Preston," his voice cracked like a teenager asking for the car keys. "Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." "You did," I said, watching Kaiser chase squirrels in the backyard. Nervous laughter. "Right, fair enough." A pause, then the real reason. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider consulting temporarily, just during the credential transition. Purely contract-based, of course. Remote work, very discreet." He was already backpedaling, trying to make it sound like he was doing me a favor. "Spencer," I said, still watching my dog. "Penelope doesn't have the credentials, does she?" Silence. "There is no transition," I continued. "Just a mess you made trying to replace something irreplaceable. I'm asking for a temporary bridge," he said quietly. "We're exposed. We can't move forward." I took a sip of my coffee. A jogger passed on the street. A neighbor's lawnmower started up. The world was calm, normal, functional. "Sounds like a you problem," I said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, I got an email. Not from Spencer, not from HR, but from Bennett in legal, short and surgical. Subject, update, risk compliance. Remediation. Body, Spencer Walsh has been removed from all insurance-related decisions effective immediately. Legal escalation initiated to board level per clause 14.3 protocol. That told me 2 things. First, they'd finally realized Spencer's MBA theater had actual casualties. Second, they were out of lifeboats and had started flagging down passing ships. I closed the email and opened my calendar. Thursday, 11:00 a.m. was already highlighted. Meeting with Westbridge Consulting Group. Strategic partnership discussion. Westbridge wasn't just a competitor. They were the competitor. Newer, sharper, hungrier, and fully aware that the insurance clause made me the last of my kind. The meeting had been scheduled a week before Spencer ever called me into that conference room, because I'd seen this coming. You don't spend 13 years keeping a company legally compliant without developing a radar for rot behind polished presentations. Spencer reeked of incompetence from day one. The formal offer landed in my inbox like a wounded bird. 17 pages of legal theater, using the word temporary 23 times and mutual flexibility like it was a magic spell. I replied with one sentence, $550 per hour, no meetings, remote only. Clause 8.7 stays in effect. They didn't respond for 3 hours. I assumed they were digesting it like broken glass. At 3:32 p.m. Vincent called. "We're prepared to accept your terms. I'll need it in writing," I said. My language unedited. "There might be pushback on the hourly rate. Then call someone else," I said. "Oh wait, you can't." The new contract arrived in 20 minutes. Shorter, cleaner, but still stuffed with corporate nonsense about reintegration periods and transition oversight. I highlighted one section, added my own clause, and sent it back. Clause 8.7. During any transition period, all credential authority replacements shall remain non-operational unless supervised in real time by the original license holder. Supervision must be contractually agreed upon by said holder. They didn't catch it. Too busy exhaling in relief. I signed. They countersigned. Just like that, I was back on the books. Sort of. To be clear, I never set foot in that building again, never joined a video call, never logged into their servers. My work came in encrypted files, requests for approvals, brief notations, routed through legal-like messages to a ghost. Even with me back, the house was still burning. 3 days into our arrangement, another client bailed, Pinnacle Solutions, Apex's subsidiary. Their notice was blunt. We require full policy reinstatement with original license authority or will terminate under Clause 17.2. We will not entertain substitutions. The board called an emergency meeting that afternoon. I didn't attend, but Bennett told me later that Vincent, usually calm and apologetic, slammed his laptop shut and said something unprintable about people who don't read contracts before signing them. That's when they realized what I already knew. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was a leash, temporary, fragile, and tightening around their necks. They thought my signature meant control, that the badge they'd stripped and the severance they'd calculated gave them the final word. But in their scramble to fix what they'd broken, they never noticed what I'd slipped into the contract. A clause, a guarantee, one last insurance policy that the next time they tried to replace me, they'd need my permission. And I already had other plans. The partnership with Westbridge was everything Spencer's MBA theories weren't: methodical, respectful, and profitable. They understood the value of expertise over connections, competence over charisma. By the end of the quarter, Summit Financial was paying me more in consulting fees than they'd ever paid in salary, for work I could do in half the time, with complete control over my schedule and zero tolerance for corporate theater. 6 months later, Spencer was quietly transferred to strategic planning, corporate speak for a cubicle with no windows and projects that would never see daylight. Meanwhile, I had a nice routine: morning coffee with Kaiser, afternoon consulting calls, evening walks around a neighborhood where nobody knew about insurance clauses or incompetent MBAs. Spencer's modernization had cost Summit their stability, their reputation, and about $4.2 million in lost contracts, all to save on one salary. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their own bad decisions. And Kaiser agrees. He's got excellent judgment about these things.